Ancient Egypt. For millennium, it has captured the imaginations, hearts, and minds of generations of truth seekers, eager to know who really built the pyramids, when they were built, and why they were built.
This documentary series is comprehensive. It's the biggest documentary series ever made about ancient Egypt. This documentary series will not only rewrite the history of ancient Egypt, it will turn the history of the human race upside down. So come with me as we go down the Nile and we discover the truth beneath the sands of Egypt. Ever since I was a child, I had a fascination with ancient Egypt. Any book, any documentary, I watched it, I read everything. But every time I saw it or I read it, something about what the Egyptologists were telling me didn't ring true. And for years and years and years, like a big jigsaw puzzle, I tried to put the pieces together. And I tried to put them together the way the Egyptologists had them. But the picture didn't make sense. And then I came to Egypt and I saw the evidence for myself. And the picture started to take a different shape. So come with me as we go down the Nile and we discover the truth beneath the sands of Egypt. Most people are aware of the three great pyramids of Giza, but the reality is there are over 100 pyramids currently known to exist in Egypt, many of them in poor states of disrepair or almost unrecognisable piles of rubble. In this episode, we're going to wrap up our examination of the Old Kingdom in ancient Egypt. In particular, we shall examine the 6th Dynasty and review what we've been told about it, and the pyramids supposedly built by its pharaohs. Were these pyramids actually built when the Egyptologists suggest they were? And were they built as burial places for kings and queens? Or do they symbolise something else, such as a map of the stars in the night sky? And what was their purpose? And what lay awaiting deep beneath the ground? Is it the answer, or part of the answer, to the true history of Egypt? And will the answer to those questions pose even more questions? Are there more pyramids and ancient temples yet to be discovered? Like the secrets of ancient Egypt, buried, waiting to be revealed? Join me as we explore all that and lots more, as we conclude our exploration of what has been referred to as the Age of the Pyramids, with a close look at the 6th Dynasty.
Towards the end of the 5th dynasty, the power over the people shifted away from the throne and into the hands of the priests, with religion assuming a position as the dominant force in society. That, and a decline in the pharaoh's power, originating during the reign of Nefertari, combined with the greater authority accorded officials during Djedkare-ECC's rule, led to the creation of a feudal-style system and a decentralization of authority. Manetho writing
that, as the pyramids of the 6th Dynasty were built very close one to another at Saqqara, the kings must have now ruled from Memphis.
These established trends, coupled with the growth in bureaucracy and an economic decline, intensified during the 3 decades of the rule of Unas, the last pharaoh of the 5th dynasty, and, when he died, without a male heir, leaving the throne vacant and in dispute, those problems continued into the 6th dynasty, considered by many authorities as the last dynasty of the Old Kingdom. It was the inauguration of Teti, less commonly known as Othos, sometimes also Tatar, Atat, or Atheth, in outdated sources, that solved the potential succession crisis.
But is that the reality of what happened? Or is it simply another speculative fabrication of events? Let's see what we can discover from the evidence.
Although Teti's mother was Queen Sesheshet, who was instrumental in her son's accession to the throne and a reconciliation of the two warring factions of the royal family, his actual lineage beyond that is unknown. It means the relationship between Teti and his predecessors remains unclear, although it is thought he was the son of his predecessor, Unas, who had at least two wives, Nebet and Kenet. But he also had at least 4 sisters, one of which was Kekeret Nebti.
Is it possible Nebut, Kenet, and Kekeret Nebti were all one and the same person? Or that Nebet was the name Kekeret Nebti assumed once she married her brother? Of course it's possible.
Unas may also have had other wives who were not siblings or blood related. So Teti may well have been the son of Unas, but to a minor wife, a woman not of royal lineage, not to one of Unas' sisters.
So possibly Teti's mother, Shesheshet, was an unknown sister of Unas, or a cousin of Unas from a different lineage. Is that why Manetho considered it a different dynasty? Who knows?
What is sure is that Teti married Iput, the eldest daughter of Unas, and possibly his half-sister, and thus justified his position as pharaoh.
Meaning that Teti most likely ascended to the throne simply because he was married to Unas' daughter, because he was Unas' son-in-law.
Teti adopted the Horus name Sehertepteri, meaning he who pacifies the two lands, to establish his reign as one of renewed political unity, and the transition appears to have occurred smoothly, most likely because Teti retained important officials such as the viziers Mayu and Kagemni, who had begun their careers under Jedkare in the 5th Dynasty. Teti had at least one other wife, Kuat, who may have been the mother of Usekare, Kentkos IV, and possibly Nert, whose funerary temple was recently found at Saqqara. Teti fathered at least 3 sons to Iput, Pepi Mirare, Tetiankam, and Nebkorhor, with the name of Edu, king's eldest son of his body, who was buried in the mastaba of Vizier Akhethetep Hemi. Teti also fathered at least 9 daughters by his other wives, each named after his own mother, Sesheshet, those being Sesheshet, whose name was Watekkether, king's eldest daughter of his body, married to Vizier Mereruker, in whose mastaba she has a chapel, and who may have been the eldest daughter of Iput, Sesheshet, with the name of Edut, king's daughter of his body, who died very young at the beginning of her father's reign and was buried in the mastaba of Vizier Ihi. Sesheshet Nubket Nebti, king's daughter of his body, wife of Vizier Kagemni, represented in her husband's mastaba, who may also have been born of Iput, Sesheshet, also called Sothayer, married to Isi, resident governor at Edfu and also titled Vizier, also born of Iput. Next is Sesheshet, with the name of Sheshet, king's eldest daughter of his body and wife of the overseer of the great court, Nefersishemter, depicted in her husband's mastaba, who is also an eldest daughter of the king, so thus cannot be born of the same mother as Wartkatathor and therefore may have been a daughter of Queen Kuat. Then there is Sesheshet, also called Sheshti, king's daughter of his body, married to Shepsepupter, the keeper of the head ornaments, and depicted in her husband's mastaba, Sesheshet, with the beautiful name of Meraut, entitled king's eldest daughter, but without the addition of his body, and therefore born of a third maybe minor queen, and married to Tahemhat, Sesheshet, wife of Remni, sole companion, and overseer of the department of the palace guards, Sesheshet, married to Pepiank, senior of Mei. Then there is the so-called Queen of the West Pyramid, in the cemetery of King Pepi I. She is called king's eldest daughter of his body and king's wife of Mirare, the name of Pepi I. Therefore, she is also a wife of Pepi and most certainly his half-sister, and, as she is also an eldest daughter of the king, her mother must be a 4th queen of Teti. Finally, there is another possible daughter, Princess Inti.
Clearly they had no television in those days.
Teti was the first ruler to be closely associated with the cult of Hathor at Dendera, and, during his reign, high officials were beginning to build funerary monuments that rivaled that of the pharaoh. One of Teti's son-in-laws, the vizier and later chief priest, Meroruker, was buried in North Saqqara close to Teti's pyramid, in a lavish tomb which consisted of 33 richly carved rooms, the biggest known tomb for an Egyptian nobleman.
Was it his tomb? Or was it his office? We'll take a good look at this structure when we get to Saqqara later in the series.
The tomb is considered to be a sign that Egypt's wealth was being transferred from the central court to the officials, a slow process that culminated in the end to the Old Kingdom.
Nepotism at its best.
Abroad, Teti maintained trade relations with Byblos and Nubia, whilst at home the capital migrated from White Wall to the populous suburbs further south, to Jedisut, derived from the name of Teti's pyramid, and the pyramid town located east of the monument. The royal residence might have been yet further south, in the valley away and across a lake from the city, to the east of South Saqqara where the pyramids of Djedkare and Pepi I were built.
The reality is, the city and the palace are yet to be discovered. Why not? Perhaps because things are not as Egyptologists suggest, and because it just doesn't make sense.
Teti commissioned the construction of a pyramid at North Saqqara.
Actually, there's no evidence that he commissioned anything, especially such a pyramid. That's just the Egyptologists assuming again.
As usual, there were the remains of an enclosure wall, and within it would have been an open courtyard, if it had not been for all the sand. Apart from the absence of accompanying queen's pyramids, the complex has a floor plan that looks almost identical to those of Pepi I, Unas, and Djedkare, except that, in the northwest part of the courtyard, there is a 40-meter deep shaft, probably used as a well by the original builders of the complex.
Possibly it was a well, or just as possibly a later shaft tomb. Or it delved down to the level of the pre-tsunami civilization.
Beyond that, following the design set by Djedkare, is the pyramid, named Teti's places are enduring. With a base length of 78.5 meters, an angle of 53 degrees, and a height of 52.5 meters, the core is built in 5 layers of masonry encased in small local quarried limestone blocks, some of which are still in situ on the eastern side.
Again, the eastern side. Is that because it was the most protected side? Because the tsunami hit from the north or northwest?
Now, however, the pyramid is little more than a rounded hill of rubble.
Although the pyramid's ancient name was Teti's places are enduring, it seems it has not lived up to expectations and has not endured very well at all. Destroyed by the tsunami, no doubt, or possibly two.
Some casing stones remain at the base of the eastern face of the pyramid, but the entrance to its subterranean corridors and chambers, which are similar to those beneath the pyramids of Djedkare and Unas, is down through the pavement of a northern chapel, which is now gone and replaced with a modern concrete entrance. Fortunately, the concrete quickly gives way to the descending passage, only about 4 feet high, and the same wide, lined with pink granite.
Once again, pink granite.
The passage levels out to a horizontal corridor, again only 4 feet tall, but even less wide, which once contained 3 granite portcullis blocks in the middle, now smashed open.
There are those granite portcullises again. And there wasn't just one granite block to get through. There were 3. So by my reckoning, this pyramid was built way before the dynastic period. Well, the subterranean chambers at least.
Their horizontal passage leads to an antechamber directly under the central axis, to its east flanked by the serdab with its 3 recesses, and to its west by the burial chamber containing the sarcophagus. The burial chamber has a vaulted ceiling made of 3 layers of huge limestone blocks.
Again, a gable and vaulted ceiling, and 3 layers, supposedly to relieve the weight on the burial chamber. But that makes no sense, as what weight there would be would only be borne by the uppermost layer. There must be more to it.
Against the western wall stood a grey basalt sarcophagus, supposedly belonging to Teti.
Basalt! Again, this time for the sarcophagus. Curiouser and curiouser.
You may not be able to see this in the dim light, but this sarcophagus has been cut in such a way that this massive lid can only slide in from this direction, which would mean that this wall's in the road. So either this sarcophagus was not in this position when the lid was put on, or that wall wasn't in this position.
All that was found here was an arm and shoulder of a mummy, who the Egyptologists presume to have been Teti, discovered among the rubble on the burial chamber floor.
It sounds to me more like the remains of someone who's been drawn and quartered. Or is this somehow symbolic of the dismembering of Osiris? And to whom did the remains really belong? One thing is certain. Many things about this pyramid just don't make sense.
Parts of the walls are decorated with stylized reliefs painted to resemble a palace facade, and the ceiling was painted with stars, but the highlight of the burial chamber, as in the Pyramid of Unas, are the end walls and a section of the horizontal passage, which are covered in pyramid texts.
Which is fascinating, but when were they added?
The pyramid texts are indicative of the Old Kingdom, being found in 5 kings' pyramids of the 5th and 6th dynasties, in order, those of Unas, Teti, Pepi I, Merenre and Pepi II, as well as a few of the Queen's pyramids, plus the 8th dynasty pyramid of King Ibi.
What do the pyramid texts really represent? Is there more to it? Is it more of an attempt to represent a spiritual journey of consciousness, from the 3rd dimensional realm to a higher realm? And were the texts connected to the chamber in any way?
According to the Egyptologists, the pyramid texts describe the king's journey from the land of the living to the netherworld and were intended to guide the pharaoh, whose cartouche was easy to pick out amongst the hieroglyphs, successfully towards his eternal life with the gods.
Perhaps, but why do they only start from the time of Unas? Why are there none in the pyramids of Snefru, Khufu, Khafre?
These pyramid texts are fascinating, and they originate from around the earlier 4th, 5th, 6th dynasties. It's not so much what's in them that is of interest, because these developed into the Book of the Dead, the Book of Gates, the Book of Caverns. What's not in any of these pyramid texts are the gods. Osiris, Isis, Anubis, they're not here. And what else isn't here is the winged disc, that image that dominates from the 18th dynasty onwards. Nowhere is it mentioned. That's a major clue to what happened at the end of the 17th dynasty.
I'll leave a detailed exploration of the rest of the subterranean chambers until later in the series when we get to Saqqara.
To the east, and adjacent to Teti's pyramid, are the ruins of the mortuary temple. If the main pyramid had not endured well, the mortuary temple had fared far worse, as most of the masonry is gone, supposedly robbed in antiquity.
But more likely washed away by a tsunami, or two.
With the exception of its entrance, possibly modified because of an earlier 5th dynasty pyramid, tagged Lepsius 29. Just to the east, the temple conforms to the same basic plans as his predecessors.
There's nothing much to see there now, but when we explore Saqqara later in the series, if a star map confirms a star in that position, then odds on there's another red granite chamber awaiting discovery somewhere beneath the sand.
Entry into the mortuary temple was through a heavy, single-panelled wooden door over a quartzite doorstep.
This time, the red granite formed the doorstep, as it had at many of the temples further up the Nile. Philae, Elephantine. Was the doorstep really the lintel of a much older temple buried underneath?
The entrance corridor had a high, vaulted ceiling decorated with stars, an alabaster floor, and decorated walls showing the king and gods, the said festival and the smiting of Egypt's enemies. It led to an open courtyard with a portico of 18 pink granite pillars, some of which were square and harked back to the 4th Dynasty, all inscribed in deep relief with the king's name and titles.
That tells me that the courtyard had been built from two separate columns, round and square, meaning two separate previous temples, both usurped by Teti, but without seeing the columns with my own eyes and the extent of their wear and tear, it's impossible to say which are older. Perhaps we'll find out later in the series.
A short staircase in the western wall leads into the inner temple through granite doorways inscribed with the names and titles of the king.
As expected, but were they originally put in place by Teti?
The niched chapel that follows leads to the offering hall, where the monolithic quartzite base of a false door still remains in situ on the western side of the offering hall.
How can the modern Egyptologists have not noticed this? First, the use of granite in key locations. Secondly, its different weathering. And thirdly, how could they not have asked the simple question, why granite?
To the southeast, the mortuary temple connects to the causeway via a small north-south courtyard that runs along the southern part of the east facade. However, Teti's Valley Temple and the 300-metre-long causeway that leads to it have not even been discovered yet, alone excavated or archaeologically investigated.
Maybe because it's been completely washed away.
The complex contains, on the opposite, southeast corner of the main pyramid, a satellite pyramid with a base length of 15.7 metres and about the same height, enclosed within the remains of its own perimeter wall and especially well preserved considering the passage of time.
Is it well preserved because the mortuary temple had shielded it from most of the impact of the initial tsunami?
The entrance to the satellite pyramid is on the northern side and leads, via a descending passage, to a single chamber, but no clearing or reconstruction work had been done.
One can only wonder what treasures await downstream at Saqqara.
Just north of Teti's pyramid is a cluster of private mastaba tombs belonging to the officials of Teti's reign, including their tombs of two of Teti's viziers, Mereruka and Kagemni.
Doesn't it make sense, given that Saqqara was the administrative centre of Egypt in the 6th Dynasty? Mereruka, being vizier, would build his residence as close as possible to his place of work. And doesn't it make sense that when the Thera tsunami swept across Egypt, it buried Mereruka's residence in 20 to 30 feet of silt and sand? It does to me. It beggars disbelief to propose that the tombs of all of these people have been found, all beautifully decorated, and yet not one actual residence has been found. Is it possible? Sure it is. Is it likely? No. How anyone could come to the conclusion they were built as tombs is totally beyond, or rather beneath, my comprehension.
Further north are two small pyramid complexes attributed to Kuit and Iput, two of Teti's queens. Little remains of the pyramid attributed to Kuit, not even its dimensions are discernible. In fact, until the fairly recent excavation of part of the mortuary temple, it was thought to be a mastaba.
And maybe at some point it was. Who knows? Of course, if it and the structure attributed to Iput I align with specific stars in the night sky, then that opens a real Pandora's box.
A mortuary temple sits in front of the east wall of the pyramid, and, although little of it has been excavated, the previously excavated offering hall revealed the usual false door and altar.
I wonder if the door is made of granite. Most probably, but we'll have to wait and see. And what if the pyramids have subterranean chambers? And if they do, if they contain granite?
Although there was a small chapel on the northern side, there was no entrance there. Rather, a vertical shaft led to the burial chamber from the second layer of the core.
Apart from the absence of a descending passage, it sounds very similar to the South Tomb and to the original vertical shaft of the 3rd Dynasty pharaoh Netjerikhet.
A rough limestone sarcophagus was found in the burial chamber, containing fragments of a cedar coffin and the bones of a middle-aged woman,
which could all have been added when the chamber was usurped.
Also discovered in the burial chamber were 5 limestone canopic jars,
as opposed to the usual 4, which means the 5th could be part of a separate burial, possibly the middle-aged woman.
An alabaster headrest was also found, along with fragments of a necklace, a gold bracelet, a small alabaster tablet with the names of the 7 sacred oils, and several copper tools, all discovered amongst the debris of models of alabaster vessels,
which could all be much later additions. But the rough-hewn limestone sarcophagus, rather than one of polished granite or basalt, seems to indicate it was an Old Kingdom addition, probably lowered down the shaft before the first stage of the mastaba was added.
Teti's pyramid became the focal point of a large necropolis and included the pyramids of his wives Kuat and Iput, mother of Pepi I. Iput's skeleton discovered buried in her pyramid in a wooden coffin.
Despite the fact the only pharaoh's names positively linked with the tombs at Saqqara are those of the 2nd Dynasty pharaohs Hotep-Sekemwi and Ninurta. It just doesn't add up.
The exact length of Teti's reign is not known. Manetho claims that, as part of a harem plot, Teti was assassinated by his palace bodyguards, but no contemporary sources confirm this. Manetho, assigning Teti an improbably long reign of 30 or 33 years, but this information has been destroyed on the royal canon of Turin, giving another unlikely estimate of 7 months, but information confirmed by the South Saqqara stone annal document from the reign of Pepi I gives him a reign of around 12 years. The relationship of the second pharaoh of the 6th dynasty, User-Kare, to his predecessor, Teti, and to his successor, Pepi I, is unknown. User-Kare's name is thephoric and incorporates the name of the sun god Ra, a naming fashion common during the preceding 5th dynasty. There is some belief amongst Egyptologists that User-Kare, meaning powerful is the soul of Ra, may have been a son of Teti to a minor queen by the name of Kuat, and thus a legitimate ruler. It's also possible User-Kare served only as a co-regent with Iput, the mother of Teti's son, Pepi, until Pepi's coming of age, and the apparent lack of resistance to Pepi's eventual accession seems to support that hypothesis. Contrary to this view, and given User-Kare's short reign, lasting perhaps only 1 year, some Egyptologists propose it cannot be a regency, as a regent would not have assumed a full royal titulary as User-Kare did, nor would he be included in king lists, and given the scarcity of documents and Manetho's claim Teti was assassinated, the majority of scholars suggest that User-Kare was a usurper, that he wasn't Teti's son at all, but rather could have been either a descendant of a lateral branch of the 5th dynasty royal family who briefly seized power in a coup, possibly with the support of the priesthood of the sun god Ra.
That might explain the plot, the assassination, his lineage, and a possible motive for the assassination, if there really was one. It seems that not only does power corrupt, but absolute power absolutely corrupts, and fame can be so short-lived.
This hypothesis finds indirect evidence in User-Kare's thephoric name that incorporates the name of Ra, a naming fashion common during the preceding 5th dynasty that had fallen out of use since the reign of Unas. Further archaeological evidence of Userkare's illegitimacy in the eyes of his successor is the absence of any mention of him in the tombs and biographies of the many Egyptian officials who served under both Userkare's predecessor, Teti, and Userkare's successor, Pepi I. For example, the viziers Enumen and Kentikere, who served both Teti and Pepi I, are completely silent about Userkare, and none of their activities during his time on the throne are reported in their tomb. In addition, the tomb of Mehi, a guard who lived under Teti, Userkare and Pepi, yielded an inscription showing that the name of Teti was first erased to be replaced by that of another king, whose name was itself erased and replaced again by that of Teti.
Was the intervening name that of Userkare, to whom Mehi may have transferred his allegiance? It's plausible.
Evidence that work on Mehi's tomb stopped abruptly and that he was never buried there supports the position that Mehi's attempt to switch back to Teti was seemingly unsuccessful.
And that Mehi's tomb was no tomb. It was a living building, most likely his office. In any case, it seems Userkare was not favoured after his reign ended.
It is also possible Userkare could have been a son of Unas, meaning he was possibly a younger brother, or most likely half-brother of Teti to one of Unas's other wives and possibly responsible for the murder of his predecessor, Teti.
Which is all totally plausible. It's also possible that Userkare was married to one of Teti's sisters, or even more likely to a younger daughter of Unas. The truth is, we just don't know.
It's also possible Userkare's successor, Pepi I, was too young to immediately assume the throne when his father, Teti, died, and that Userkare not only briefly ruled Egypt as a legitimate stopgap ruler, but also as a corregent with Queen Iput I.
Or possibly even some bizarre combination of all of the above. It's all speculation.
One thing seems clear. Archaeological evidence lends credence to the idea that Userkare was illegitimate in the eyes of his successor Pepi I, in particular, there being no mention of Userkare in the tombs and biographies of the many Egyptian officials, such as the viziers Enumen and Kentikere, who served under both Teti and Pepi I. Since Userkare was a 6th Dynasty pharaoh, his tomb was presumably planned to be a pyramid, but it has not yet been discovered, the brevity of his reign suggesting that it was more than likely unfinished at his death, making modern identification difficult.
Maybe it hasn't been discovered because it doesn't exist.
Two possible hypotheses for the location of Userkare's pyramid have been put forth. The first, that it's in the area of Saqqara South, known today as Tabet Olgesh, northwest of the mortuary complex of Pepi I, this because a large necropolis of 6th Dynasty administration officials was found there, which logically suggests the nearby presence of a royal pyramid.
Or even more logically, it was what it was, an administrative area.
The other, that the pyramid of Userkare is waiting to be found midway between those of Pepi I and Merenre-Nemtiemsaf I, at a place that would make the three pyramids form a line parallel to the one formed by the pyramids of Sekhemkhet, Unas, Dosir, Userkaf and Teti to the north.
Or thirdly, there was, and still is, no pyramid.
Userkare is thought to have reigned anywhere from 1 to 5 years, but despite Userkare's absence from Manethoer's Egyptiaker, Userkare is well attested to in other historical and contemporaneous sources, in particular the Saqqara stone, which seems in contradiction with the idea of him being illegitimate, rather that he was victim of a damnatio memoriae by his successor, Pepi. The third king of the 6th dynasty, Pepi I Merenre, was the son of Teti, the founder of the dynasty, and Iput I, who may have been a daughter of Unas, the final ruler of the preceding 5th dynasty, her parentage directly attested to by a relief on a decree uncovered in Coptus that mentions Iput as Pepi's mother, by inscriptions in her mortuary temple mentioning her titles as mother of a king and as mother of Pepi, by her mention as being Pepi's mother on the 6th Dynasty royal annals, and by the architecture of her tomb, which had been changed from an original mastaba form into a pyramid on the accession of her son to the throne.
And so we see that evidence exists that at least one of these pyramids was originally a mastaba. How many others were as well?
The observation that Teti was most probably Pepi's father follows from the location of Iput's tomb next to Teti's pyramid, as was customary for a queen consort.
Speculation that throws it all into conjecture. Should Iput's pyramid support the star map theory?
There's actually no direct evidence in the archaeological record of any difficulties associated with Pepi I's rise to the throne, which one might well have expected had Userkare been an usurper, especially considering Iput seems to have died before Pepi's accession to the throne.
What the truth is, we may never know.
Pepi's accession to the throne may have occurred in times of discord as the figures and names of several contemporary palace officials, in particular the Vizier Hezi, the overseer of weapons Mereri, and chief physician Sinkuiptar, as represented in their tombs, have been deliberately erased, perhaps an attempt at a damnatio memoriae targeting the three men. It's possible these men could therefore be behind Teti's assassination.
So much for a united Egypt. Or the tombs were not tombs. They were offices, and new officials were appointed.
Further archaeological evidence of Userkare's illegitimacy in the eyes of his successor is the absence of any mention of him in the tombs and biographies of the many Egyptian officials who served under both Teti and Pepi I. For example, the viziers Enumen and Kentikar, who served both Teti and Pepi I, are completely silent about Userkare, and none of their activities during his time on the throne are reported in their tomb. The tomb of Mehi, a guard who lived under Teti, Userkare and Pepi, yielded an inscription showing that the name of Teti was first erased to be replaced by that of another king, whose name was itself erased and replaced again by that of Teti, the theory being the intervening name was that of Userkare, to whom Mehi may have transferred his allegiance. Mehi's attempt to switch back to Teti was seemingly unsuccessful, as there is evidence that work on his tomb stopped abruptly and that he was never buried there.
The plot certainly thickens. Again, if it was an office and not a tomb, the new pharaoh named his own new officials.
The relative chronology of Pepi I's reign is well established by contemporary artifacts, archaeological evidence, and historical records such as the near-contemporary South Saqqara stone, indicating he succeeded Userkare and was succeeded by Merenre I's Nemtiumsaf. Two more historical sources, the Abydos King list, written under Seti I, and the Turin Canon, a list of kings on papyrus dating to the reign of Ramses II, agree with this chronology.
But that's not the only evidence we need to consider.
Historical sources against this order of succession include Manetho's Egyptiacar, although no copies of Egyptiacar have survived, and it is now known only through later writings by Sextus Julius Africanus and Eusebius, that mentions the succession Othos Phaeus, Methosuphus, at the start of the 6th Dynasty. Othos, Phaeus, and Methosuphus respectively understood to be the Hellenized forms for Teti, Pepi I, and Merenre, meaning that Egyptiacar omits Userkare, which agrees with the Karnak king list written under Thutmoses III, and the Saqqara tablet, written under Ramses II, these lists comprising a selection of royal ancestors to be honored.
So why was Userkare not honoured, not recognised? Was it because he was not a legitimate ruler, a bastard son, just like we see in the lineage of the British royal family?
Ascending the throne, Pepi chose the Horus name of Miritarvi, meaning he who is loved by the two lands, or beloved of the two lands.
A clear indication that there was still division and some form of political instability and trouble in ancient Egypt at the time.
Similarly, Pepi chose the throne name Nefersahor, meaning perfect is the protection of Horus, Pepi's writing of his own name Miratarvi being highly unusual, inverting the order of the hieroglyphic signs composing it, placing the sign for beloved before that for two lands, showing Pepi's deference to the powerful nobility of the country on which he was dependent.
Or that's just how he wrote it.
Pepi I had at least 6 consorts, the first 2, Anchises Pepi I and Anchises Pepi II, were daughters of the nomarch of Abydos, Kui, and his wife Nebert, and each of whom bore future pharaohs. Next was Nubwinet, then Enenakintli, who became one of Pepi's viziers, and Mehar, with relief fragments from the necropolis surrounding Pepi's pyramid mentioning another consort, Sebwitet. Based on partial evidence, 2 further consorts have been proposed, Nedjeftet, whose name is recorded on blocks excavated in the necropolis adjacent to Pepi's pyramid. She may even be the owner of a pyramid west of Pepi's.
But I think it's unlikely she is.
The second other possible consort, Behinu, was buried in the second largest queen pyramid of Pepi's necropolis, the one to the west of his, although she may also have been a consort of Pepi II.
Meaning the Egyptologists are practicing that polyphylla archaeology again, especially if the pyramids correlate with stars in a constellation, which we'll explore later in the episode.
A final unnamed consort, only known through her title Wurijamtes, meaning great of affection, is known from inscriptions uncovered in the tomb of Weni, an official serving Pepi. Her name purposefully left unmentioned by Weni because she conspired against Pepi and was prosecuted when the conspiracy was discovered.
It's not hard to imagine that having 9 wives, that they didn't all get along, and that all sorts of jealousies and internal power struggles may have ensued.
Pepi fathered at least 4 sons, his immediate successor Merenre-Nemtiumsaf I, most likely to Anchises Pepi I, Pepi II Neferkare, the subsequent pharaoh, born of Anchises Pepi II, who was probably born at the very end of Pepi I's reign given he was only 6 upon ascending the throne after Merenre's rule, which raises the alternative hypothesis that Pepi II could be a son of Merenre.
It's all speculation.
Next was Tetiang, meaning Teti lives, whose mother has yet to be identified, and who is only known from an ink inscription bearing his name discovered in Pepi's pyramid, and finally Prince Hornet Jerkhet, born of what one presumes was a minor wife, Mehar.
Which makes sense.
At least 3 of Pepi I's daughters have been tentatively identified, all future consorts of Pepi II. The first, Merititis IV, was the king's eldest daughter and was buried in the necropolis surrounding her father's pyramid. The second is Neith, whom he fathered with Anchises Pepi I, who may have been the mother of Pepi II's successor Merenre-Nemtiumsaf II. The third is Iput II, whose identity as Pepi's daughter remains uncertain because her title of a daughter of the king may only be honorary.
It can get a bit confusing, but if the star map hypothesis proves plausible, it will not only rewrite the history of the Pepi necropolis, but the entire history of ancient Egypt. More on that when we get to Saqqara later in the series.
In terms of his reign, the progressive decentralization and regionalization of administrative power started in the 5th Dynasty and witnessed by Pepi during the reign of his father, had weakened the king's primacy and ascendancy over his own administration. To counteract this, Pepi I changed the organizational structure of the territorial administration by nominating provincial governors, especially in Upper Egypt, while it appears Lower Egypt possibly remained under direct royal administration. Under Pepi, and throughout Egypt, the provincial agricultural estates affiliated with the crown during the preceding dynasty were now replaced by new administrative entities called nomes, agricultural centers controlling tracts of land, livestock, and workers.
What we might call local councils. And given the enormous distances between Upper and Lower Egypt, it may originally have been a simple and practical solution to governance and the maintaining of control.
Together with temples and royal domains, these numerous nomes represented a network of warehouses accessible to royal envoys and from which taxes and labour could easily be collected.
And on the surface, it probably seemed a good idea, but it was a solution, as history has shown us over and over, that clearly didn't take into account the thirst of men for greed and power.
As nepotism was rampant in Egyptian royal culture, affluent and opportunistic provincial families, more than likely distant or obscure blood-related branches of the pharaoh's own lineage, played an increasingly important role in this increased decentralization and regionalization of administration into nomes by marrying into the royal family, thus accessing the highest offices of the state administration, and having a strong influence at the court, while also consolidating their hold over regional power bases by creating local dynasties.
So, appoint your brother-in-law or your cousin to govern in your stead, or marry one of your daughters off to the son of a potentially political dissenter or opponent, and appoint him as a governor. Quite simply, it was a recipe for disaster, a ticking time bomb.
However, fresh from experiencing the questionable reign of his predecessor, User-Kare, and confronted with the subsequent protracted decline of pharaonic power at the expense of the emerging dynasties of local officials, it appears Pepi reacted firstly by recruiting new officials of non-noble extraction and unknown background for the small provincial centres so as to curtail the influence of powerful local families. Secondly, he ordered a vast architectural program involving the construction of temples dedicated to local gods and numerous royal chapels for his own cult throughout Egypt, reinforcing his presence in the provinces. It was around this time, sometime after his 20th year of reign, problems arose directly between Pepi and relatives of his father, and just like his father, Pepi faced a conspiracy hatched by one of his harem consorts, only known by her title, Wurigyamtes, who may have tried to have her son designated heir to the throne.
No, I don't buy that. Not hatched by a consort. Once, maybe. But twice in such a short period? No way. As a consort, she would have had a good life.
If the conspiracy had happened early in Pepi's reign, the queen concerned would most likely have been User-Kare's mother and Teti's consort rather than one of Pepi's consorts,
which now seems highly unlikely.
However, most scholars agree that the conspiracy occurred after more than 2 decades into Pepi's reign, meaning the queen could have been Merenra's mother, whilst some see this as highly unlikely and outright outlandish respectively, as this queen's son would surely have been punished along with her.
I don't think it's any of that. I think it was a second attempt to seize control of the throne by the same people behind the assassination of Teti. And my money is on the priests of Ra. Why? Because they are the scribes, and they didn't like the way first Teti and then Pepi had cut them out of the administration, out of all of their corrupt little perks, and bulldozed them into running the new temples and chapels. Pepi was no fool. He knew who the real dangers to his throne were, and the priests set up Wurigyamtes as the patsy.
Weni, then officially a palace superintendent, but who served as a judge during the subsequent trial, is the one who mentions Wurigyamtes' name, although he does not report the precise nature of her crime.
Perhaps because she was innocent and set up as a scapegoat. But it was clear Pepi couldn't trust the priests. He needed allies.
Pepi reinforced his power after the harem conspiracy by forming alliances with Kui, the provincial nomarch of Abydos, marrying 2 of his daughters, Anchise'n Pepi I and Anchise'n Pepi II, and making both Kui's wife, Nebet, and later her son, Jiao, viziers, the first and last time until the 26th Dynasty, some 1800 years later, that a woman bore the title of Vizier of Upper Egypt, although Egyptologists debate whether her appointment was purely honorific or whether she really assumed the duties of a vizier.
There's also the possibility that Nebet may have been blood related to Pepi. That said, how is it the Egyptologists can't figure all this out? How does fixing a harem conspiracy by adding 2 or more consorts to the harem make any sense at all? It doesn't.
It's perhaps in response to these events why Pepi changed his prenomen, Nefersahor, to Marire, meaning beloved of Ra, even updating the inscriptions inside his pyramid. This late change, with Pepi I incorporating the sun god Ra's name into his own, may reflect some agreement with the influential priesthood of Ra.
I'm sure that it was more than just an agreement, more likely an appeasement or a peace treaty.
Pepi's administrative reforms marked the apogee of 6th Dynasty and Old Kingdom foreign policy, with flourishing trade, several mining and quarrying expeditions, major military campaigns and extensive building activities, his extensive building activities being so prolific that in 1900 the Egyptologist Flinders Petrie stated,
"This king has left more monuments, large and small, than any other ruler before the 12th dynasty."
Trade with the oases of the Western Desert flourished along with Ebler and settlements along the Levantine coast, which had existed during the 5th dynasty, seems to have flourished under Pepi I, their chief trade partner, most likely Byblos. Dozens of inscriptions on stone vessels found there containing Pepi's cartouches, tituli and commemorating his jubilee from the temple of Barlat Jebel. Like many of his 5th and 6th dynasty predecessors, Pepi I launched mining and quarrying expeditions to Wadi Magarer in the Sinai Peninsula for turquoise and copper, to the mines at Hatnob and Wadi Hammamat for alabaster, greywacke and siltstone, to Jebel el-Silsiler and Sahel Island, further south through Merjisser, fetching lapis lazuli and lead or tin, to the southern Red Sea, possibly to Punt, north to Byblos, and far afield as Ebler in modern-day Syria, and possibly to Canaan. At the same time, an extensive network of caravan routes traversed Egypt's western desert, including from Abydos to the Kargar Oasis and from there to the Dakhla and Salimer Oases.
Well, I don't doubt the caravan routes, but was the Western Desert actually a desert? Were the oases really oasis? More on that later in the series.
The walls of the tombs of Pepi's contemporary nomarchs of Elephantine, alabaster vessels bearing Pepi's cartouche found in Kermer, the 6th dynasty royal annals, and inscriptions in tumors, all record Pepi's aggressive military campaigns into Nubia in the south, whilst, to the northeast, Pepi launched at least 5 military expeditions against their sand dwellers of Sinai, and to Canaan in the southern Levant. These campaigns, recounted on the walls of Weni's tomb, state that, as he had also been given tasks befitting a general, he ordered nomarchs in Upper Egypt and the Nile Delta region to call up the levies of their own subordinates, and these in turn summoned their subordinates down through every level of the local administration.
I guess a form of conscription.
Meanwhile, Nubian mercenaries were also recruited and endowed with the power to enroll men and seize goods, so that, in total, tens of thousands of men were at Weni's disposal.
All of which indirectly reveals the absence of a permanent Egyptian standing army at the time.
The goal of this army was either to repulse rebelling Semitic people or to seize their properties and conquer their land in southern Canaan, an action possibly motivated by the intense commercial activities between Egypt and this region.
It sounds like so long as there was plenty of profitable trade going on, then all was well.
Pepi devoted most of his building efforts to local cults and royal chapels, small cult buildings comprising one or more chambers to hold offerings dedicated to the cult of the deceased or, in this case, the king, seemingly with the objective of affirming the king's stature and presence in the provinces. Such chapels dedicated to Pepi I, marking the first period during which small stone temples dedicated to local deities were built in Egypt, have been uncovered, or are known from contemporary sources to have stood, across Egypt, in Hierakonpolis, Dendera, Abydos, Memphis, Zawayat el-Matin, Ashiut, Shus, El-Kab, Bubastis in the central Nile Delta region, and a settlement of the Dakhla Oasis, all these buildings probably peripheral to, or inside, larger temples hosting extensive cult activities.
But was it just building?
In an underground store beneath the floor of Pepi's Kar Chapel at Hierakonpolis, a statue of the 2nd Dynasty king, Karsekemwe, was discovered, along with a terracotta lion cub made during the Thinite era, a golden mask representing Horus, and 2 copper statues.
The statue of Karsekemwe surely raises the question of whether the Kar Chapel was built on top of the site of a previous structure.
The close association between Kar chapels and temples to deities might have spurred building activities for the latter. For example, the Bubastis complex of Pepi I comprised a 95-metre by 60-metre enclosure wall with a small rectangular Kar chapel housing 8 pillars near its north corner, situated peripheral to the main Old Kingdom temple dedicated to the goddess Bastet. Similarly, in Dendera, Pepi restored the temple complex to the goddess Hathor, and in Abydos, he built a small rock-cut chapel dedicated to the local god Khentiamentiu. In addition, at the southern border of Egypt, on Elephantine Island, several faience plaques bearing Pepi's cartouche, and an alabaster statue of an ape with its offspring bearing Pepi I's cartouche were uncovered in the temple of Satet. In this temple, Pepi built a red granite naos, destined either to house the goddess's statue, or a statue of Pepi I himself, which would mean the naos was yet another Kar chapel.
And that makes me think he appropriated the red granite from a much earlier structure.
Pepi I's cartouche and the epithet, beloved of Satet, is inscribed on the naos, which stands 1.32 meters high.
But was the inscription contemporary? Was it crisp and precise, or crudely done, scratched roughly into the rock, just like the altars in the Temple of Isis on Philae Island we examined in episode 4?
Pepi seems to have undertaken wider works in the temple, possibly reorganizing its layout by adding walls and an altar.
Works? Renovations? Or repairs?
In this context, the faience tablets bearing his cartouche may be foundation offerings made at the start of the works, although this has been contested.
And well it should be. The faience reminds us of the south tomb under the pyramid of Netjereket at Saqqara, possibly dating to who knows how long prior to the 1st dynasty. So was all the building and restoration work due to some unknown disaster? The evidence we examined in episode 7 on Elephantine Island suggests it may have been. Does this narrow down the time frame of the catastrophe? Or was it indicative of work instigated after these structures were unearthed from a much earlier catastrophe? I think the statue of Karsekemwe, and especially the Thinite terracotta lion cub found in the underground store at Hierakonpolis, and the evidence in episodes 8, 9 and 10 strongly suggests that the recovery was protracted and extensive, covering the entire Old Kingdom. The question is, does the evidence carry through to Pepi's pyramid?
Pepi's mortuary complex in South Saqqara was the center of a wider necropolis that comprised the tombs of the royal family and, further afield, those of the high officials of the state administration, including a tomb for Weni. Pepi's complex was named Mennefer Pepi, variously translated as Pepi's splendor is enduring, the perfection of Pepi is established, the beauty of Pepi endures, or the perfection of Pepi endures. The shortened name Mennefer for the pyramid complex progressively became the name of the nearby capital of Egypt, which had originally been called Anebhej. In particular, the Egyptian Menopher ultimately became Memphis in Greek, a name that is still in use for this ancient city. The complex is neighbored on its southwest corner by a necropolis containing the pyramids of Pepi I's consorts and their dedicated funerary temples, started during his own reign and developed during the subsequent reigns of Merenre and Pepi II. Pepi's main pyramid originally had a base length of 78.75 meters, a slope of around 53 degrees, and an estimated height of around 52.5 meters. Now destroyed, today it is no more than a 12-meter-high ruin containing a pit in its center dug by stone thieves.
So what happened to it? Stone thieves? Or a tsunami? Or two? Maybe both.
From the fragments of the restoration text of Khimwaset, Ramses II's eldest son, we know the pyramid was in good shape during the 19th dynasty, with few improvements.
At first, that seems confusing, because it sounds like the tsunami at the end of the 17th dynasty didn't have much effect. But then I realised it was a translation, perhaps a rather poor one, and that Khimwaset could just as easily have written that he had been responsible for the repairs, that it was he who made a few improvements, and then summed it up by saying that it was all in good shape.
The pyramid, constructed in the same fashion as royal pyramids since the reign of Djedkare some 80 years earlier, had a core of 6 steps, constructed from small roughly dressed blocks of limestone all bound with clay mortar. With a casing of fine white limestone, the entrance to the substructure of the pyramid was from the courtyard pavement of the north chapel that has since disappeared.
Perhaps the victim of a tsunami. But the real concrete evidence, or rather red granite evidence, if it's to be found, will be found below the surface.
The subterranean levels begin with a descending limestone passage that leads to a vestibule, after which the next corridor is horizontal but reinforced about the middle with 3 portcullis blocks of pink granite that guard the chambers.
Pink granite, just as expected. The evidence just keeps adding up, although the term reinforced sounds more to me like a later rebuilding.
Beyond the barriers, the corridor leads to 3 chambers, an antechamber situated on the pyramid's vertical axis, a serdab with 3 niches to its east, and, to the west, a burial chamber. The gabled ceilings of the antechamber and burial chamber, each consisting of 3 layers of 16 blocks and weighing around 5,000 tons.
That's a lot of additional weight to put above the sarcophagus, just to support even smaller limestone blocks. If it was for that purpose, and I severely doubt it, then why have a gabled ceiling over the antechamber when it's unnecessary?
The walls of Pepi I's antechamber, burial chamber, and much of the corridor are covered with vertical columns of the most extensive corpus of inscribed hieroglyphic pyramid texts found in Egypt, painted green with ground malachite and gum arabic, a colour symbolising renewal.
I'm going to leave further exploration of the substructure until we get to Saqqara later in the series. Suffice to say that from the evidence so far, I severely doubt that Pepi's pyramid was built by Pepi. Usurped, yes, but built by him, unlikely.
Pepi's pyramid was part of a wider funerary complex comprising a small cult pyramid and mortuary temple surrounded by an enclosure wall. The mortuary temple next to the pyramid was laid out according to a standard plan, making it nearly the same as the temples of Djedkare, Unas, and Teti before him. The temple had an entrance hall some 6.29 meters high, now almost completely destroyed, leading into an open columned courtyard. Storage rooms to the north and south flanked the hall, with the inner temple containing a chapel with 5 statue niches, and an offering hall with a false door in the back wall adjacent to the pyramid, all later additions, most likely during the reign of Pepi I. Within the structure of the temple, blocks from the pyramid of Pepi's paternal grandmother, Queen Sesheshet, were discovered, with other blocks reused by Pepi as foundation of a pious memorial to his grandmother. In addition, at the same time as he apparently distanced himself from his father's line, Pepi transformed his mother's tomb into a pyramid and posthumously bestowed a new title on her, daughter of the king of Upper and Lower Egypt, thereby emphasizing his royal lineage as a descendant of Unas, last ruler of the 5th Dynasty.
That's interesting, and it goes towards my reconstruction theory, that both structures may have been previously damaged by the same catastrophe. And it seems to be strong evidence that scattered blocks were used to rebuild the structures. And, given there was a mortuary temple, it would be fair to assume there was also a causeway and a valley temple.
It's possible the mortuary temple and the causeway, both now heavily damaged due to the activity of lime makers who extracted and burned the construction stones to turn them into mortar and whitewash in later times, might have been lined with statues of kneeling bound captives representing Egypt's traditional enemies.
Or were they hit by a tsunami perhaps?
The causeway leading from the mortuary temple down to a valley temple by the Nile completed the overall construction.
But wait, there's more.
To the southeast of Pepi's pyramid is a satellite pyramid. Its purpose remains unclear as, while it had a burial chamber, it was never used as such and must have been a purely symbolic structure.
And that shows the inconsistency in the Egyptologists' speculations. Either the satellite pyramids are Queen's pyramids, or they're not.
It may have hosted the pharaoh's car or a miniature statue of the king, and could have been used for ritual performances centering around the burial and resurrection of the Ka spirit during the said festival.
Or it could have been a takeaway taco stand, because there's no evidence of that either.
Excavations of the small cult pyramid yielded statue fragments, pieces of stele and offering tables, which would indicate Pepi's funerary cult continued into the Middle Kingdom.
And all of which could have been added at any time.
To the south and southwest of his pyramid, Pepi had pyramids built for his consorts outside the enclosure wall of the complex but inside an area delineated by a street to the west.
Although the evidence would seem to indicate they weren't built for the queens. So what was their purpose? And more importantly, when were they built?
3 of the main Queen's pyramids were built in a row on an east-northeast to west-southwest axis, each with a base side dimension of about 20 meters, the ancient Egyptians referring to the owners of these pyramids as their Queen of the East, their Queen of the Center, and their Queen of the West. The pyramid of their Queen of the East belonged to Nebwenet, whose name, image and titles are preserved on a forelin jam uncovered in the attached mortuary temple to the east.
There they go again. The temple might be attributable to Nebwenet, but that doesn't mean the pyramid was built at the same time.
There is little left of Nebwenet's pyramid, enough to estimate its basic layout, that it had a base of 26.2 meters, making it similar in size to some of the other pyramids in the necropolis, that it was built of limestone, and its entrance was to the north, in the pavement of the courtyard of the small mud-brick chapel, which hosted a limestone altar, now broken.
The inconsistencies persist. Limestone pyramids and altar, and yet a chapel of mud brick.
The entrance to the pyramid's substructures led, via a descending corridor, first to a small antechamber, then through a simple pink granite portcullis barrier, to the burial chamber slightly to the south of the pyramid's apex.
And there's my key evidence. The pink granite portcullis.
The chamber had a flat ceiling, no inscriptions on the walls, and fragments of a pink granite sarcophagus and pieces of inscribed alabaster were recovered in the burial chamber.
Again, fragments of a pink granite sarcophagus. But why is that such a common finding? Fragments of a granite sarcophagus. What happened to them? Were they smashed from the outside? Which is hard to comprehend given any tomb robber simply had to push the lid aside, assuming they could even get in, as many of the pyramids were sealed, Or did the sarcophagi shatter from within because of what was inside? And if that were the case, what was it that was inside that caused the explosion?
To the east was a serdab and the scant remnants of funerary equipment.
Which is possibly more likely where the inscribed alabaster belonged.
Immediately west of the Pyramid of Nebwenet is the Pyramid of Enenakintı. The name, image and titles of this queen are inscribed on door jambs, and 2.2-meter high red-painted obelisks on either side of the gateway to the mortuary temple, establishing that Enenakintı was buried there.
No, again, the temple might be attributable to Enenakintı, but that doesn't mean the pyramid is.
With a base of 22.53 meters, the pyramid size and layout is similar to that of Nebwenet, except that the burial chamber is located precisely beneath the pyramid apex. Fragments of a grey wax sarcophagus and pieces of stone vessels were uncovered there. The mortuary temple of the Pyramid of Enenakintı was much larger than Nebwenet's, unusually wrapped around the pyramid on its eastern, northern and southern sides.
To me, that clearly indicates that it was a later addition, squeezed into the inter-pyramid space, and not part of the original placement of the so-called Queen's Pyramids at all.
Enenak's complex also comprised its own small cult pyramid, 6.3 meters at the base, to the southeast and within the perimeter wall of the complex.
So, a cult pyramid for a minor queen. That doesn't make sense.
West of Enenak's pyramid is that of their Queen of the West. The identity of this pyramid's owner is preserved on an obelisk in front of her pyramid only as the eldest daughter of the king.
So she could belong to any era.
The pyramid had a base length of around 20 meters, similar to those of Enenak and Nebwenet, and now stands 3 meters tall. Entry into the substructure is via the north face, the burial chamber located under the vertical axis of the pyramid. The location of the serdab is unusual, being to the south of the burial chamber instead of east. Substantial remains of funerary equipment were found inside, including wooden weights, ostrich feathers, copper fishhooks, and fired clay vessels, but none bore their owner's name.
Which means they could have been put there at any time.
The pyramid has a hastily built mortuary temple to the southeast, with an offering hall and a room with 2 statue niches. Relief fragments discovered depict scenes of processions and estates, along with an incomplete cartouche of Pepi I's name.
But it doesn't mean the pyramid was built by Pepi.
The pyramid of Anchises Pepi II occupies the southwestern extremity of the necropolis of Pepi I. With a base of 31.4 meters, the pyramid once reached 30 meters high, making it the largest of the Queen's pyramids. The burial chamber has the same design as those of Nebwenet and Enenakintı, although its walls are inscribed with spells from the pyramid texts, a privilege that was usually preserved for kings. It contains an enormous, carefully crafted basalt sarcophagus with the Queen's name and titles inscribed upon its lid and on the partially exposed east and north sides.
A basalt sarcophagus? Was the Queen's name and her titles a later addition when the pyramid was usurped in the 6th Dynasty? It has to be considered. We'll certainly find out more when we get to Saqqara later in the series.
The funerary complex of Anchises Pepi II was also the largest in the necropolis except for that of Pepi himself, covering an area of 3,500 square meters. It had a monumental entrance with a granite frame, its lintel bearing the Queen's name and titles being more than 3.6 meters wide and weighing over 17 tons.
Given the size of the lintel and the frame being made of granite, I would put my money on the Queen's name and the title being a later addition to an earlier structure, a much earlier structure.
The mortuary temple to the north of the pyramid contained 20 storage rooms for offerings, and a small chapel stood on the pyramid northern face at the entrance of the substructures. Painted reliefs, of which only scant remains have been found, include a small scene depicting the queen and a princess on a boat among papyrus plants. Pepi's consort Mehar was buried in a pyramid on the southwest corner of Pepi's enclosure wall. Directly adjacent to Mehar's pyramid's eastern face is the mortuary temple, where a relief bearing the name and image of Prince Hornetriket, her son, was uncovered.
So they don't even find her name in the temple, they find her son's name. And yet somehow they determined that the pyramid belongs to Mehar. That's not even speculation. That's fabrication.
Mehar's pyramid is intruded upon by the Pyramid of Behinu, establishing that Mehar was a consort of Pepi I early in his reign while Behinu lived in the later part of his rule.
Or that neither pyramid belonged to the era of Pepi, and the temples were squeezed in as much later additions.
Located on the western end of the necropolis, immediately northwest of Mehar's tomb on which it intrudes, is the Queen's Pyramid of Behinu. With a base of 26.2 meters, Queen Behinu's pyramid is of similar size and layout to the other queen's pyramids in the necropolis. The burial chamber measured 6.24 meters by 2.88 meters, and its walls were inscribed with numerous spells of the pyramid texts. The head of a wooden statue of the queen as well as her opened basalt sarcophagus were unearthed there.
Lots of things don't add up here. Firstly, the walls of the burial chamber of a minor queen are inscribed with spells, usually only reserved for the pharaoh. Then there's a basalt sarcophagus. Yes, a wooden head of Behem was found there, but that doesn't mean the pyramid was built for her.
Behinu's mortuary temple is on the pyramid's southern face. The entrance of the temple, flanked with 2 granite obelisks, leads to several rooms, which once housed statues and offering altars, while a further 10 rooms served for storage.
And again, not 1, but 2 granite obelisks. I'm convinced that they're from a much earlier structure.
There is also a small cult pyramid on its southeast corner within the perimeter wall of the complex.
So, a cult pyramid for a minor queen? That doesn't make sense. And then there's the bleedingly obvious question. If these are all Queen's pyramids, why are there no pyramids to his other consorts? To Sebwetet or Nejeftet? And especially to Uncas and Pepi I. Build a pyramid to one sister, but not to the other? Now, given the supposed conspiracy caused by Werek Yamtes, that I could understand. But no pyramid to Uncas and Pepi I? It undermines the whole Queen's Pyramids proposition.
Pepi's first 5 daughters were also buried in pyramids adjacent to that of their father. Parts of a pink granite sarcophagus were found in the burial chamber of the southwestern pyramid of Merititis IV, and in the badly damaged burial chamber of the pyramid of Uncas and Pepi III. A sarcophagus was found which was cut from a huge sandstone block and embedded in the floor. The lid of the sarcophagus formed from a huge rough-addressed block of pink granite.
More granite, and again in fragments. Everywhere below the ground seems to reveal granite or basalt, evidence that supports my red granite theory. But what of the sandstone sarcophagus with a pink granite lid? Logic would suggest that the coffer and the lid should be made of the same substance, either sandstone or granite, but not mixed. The answer? Like most of the other granite sarcophagi, for some reason they fragmented, and the one in the pyramid of Uncas and Pepi III was no exception. However, the lid clearly survived, so a sandstone coffer was fashioned as a replacement. Why? Because they didn't have the technology to fashion a replacement out of granite.
The pyramid of Ankhesenapepi III also has its own cult pyramid.
But the Egyptologists have no explanation for that. A cult pyramid for the daughter of a minor queen. That doesn't make any sense at all. Having examined the layout of the Queen's pyramids, it's glaringly obvious to me that if you were going to add smaller pyramids for the pharaoh's queens around the pyramid of the demised king, then surely you would add them evenly spaced around the perimeter and take into account the location of the accompanying mortuary temple. But nowhere in Egypt is that the case. Clearly their positioning is not random. There has to be some meaning to it, as it makes no sense to clump them all together unless they were a copy of something, like a star map or a constellation. So what do we have here at the Pepi complex? If the unique arrangements of the complex of the pyramids of Pepi I, including the identification of binary star systems, correlates to an actual arrangement of stars in the night sky to a distant time in the past, meaning if the star map theory holds, then the biggest star, the Pepi I pyramid, is clearly more than part of its own binary system, as it is accompanied as part of the constellation by 9 other smaller stars, 3 of which, Behenu, Ankhesenapepi III, and Inanek Inti, were also binary. Then surely it has to be absolute proof that the Queen's pyramids theory is way off track. Sure, they may have been usurped later, but it wasn't why they were built. They were built by an ancient civilization that saw the layout was a 2-dimensional representation of a 3-dimensional perspective, and that the stars were represented as they appeared from Earth, not with their actual magnitudes, which means the smaller stars, in fact, could be massive, just further away. Basically, we are seeing as above, so below, the representation of the sky on the Earth, as it was represented sometime in the far distant past. And given the movement of the stars over time, that map would surely point to that time. All that said, theories are fine, but we should wait until we've looked at all of the evidence. And we've still got quite a few pyramids to examine.
At the end of his reign, Pepi's rule may have been no less troubled than his early reign, as it's possible Pepi faced another conspiracy, this one involving his vizier, Roer, as the image of Roer in his own tomb, dated on stylistic grounds to the second half of Pepi's reign, has been desecrated, his name, hands and feet chiseled off. The conspiracy may have aimed at having someone else designated heir to the throne at the expense of his son Merenre.
Another move by the priests of Ra.
Because of this failed conspiracy, Pepi I may have taken the drastic step of crowning Merenre during his own reign, thereby creating the earliest documented co-regency in the history of Egypt, a gold pendant bearing the names of both Pepi I and Merenre I as living kings indirectly support this. Further, that an inscription mentioning King Merenre's 10th year of reign in Hatnob contradicts Manetho's figure of 7 years, evidence that Merenre dated the start of his reign before the end of his father's reign, as a co-regency would permit. But the co-regency remains uncertain, the 6th Dynasty royal annals bearing no trace either for or against it, but the shape and size of the stone on which the annals are inscribed makes it more probable that Merenre did not start to count his years of reign until soon after the death of his father.
So the accuracy of history can only ever be determined by the individual perspectives of those who write it down, which leaves a lot of room for misinterpretation, subjective opinion, deliberate distortion, and downright pig-faced lies.
The length of Pepi I's reign remains somewhat uncertain, although the consensus is that he ruled over Egypt for over 40 years, possibly 49 or 50 years, and possibly longer. The archaeological evidence in favor of his long reign includes not only his numerous building projects but also many surviving objects, such as numerous alabaster ointment vessels bearing a standard inscriptions reading,
The king of Biran Lower Egypt, Mariri, may he be kept alive forever. The first occasion of the Sad Festival,
made in celebration of his first Sed festival, meant to rejuvenate the king and first celebrated on the 30th year of a king's rule. The South Saqqara stone and an inscription in Hatnub both indicate that Pepi reigned for at least 49 years, possibly longer, because of the damaged state of the South Saqqara stone. Another historical source supporting such a long reign is Africanus' epitome of Manetho's Egyptiaker, which credits Pepi I with a reign of 53 years. Pepi I was the object of a funerary cult after his death, with ritual activities taking place in his funerary complex during the First Intermediate Period, a period during which the Egyptian state seems to have collapsed, and through the Middle Kingdom. It was not until early in the Second Intermediate Period that Pepi's cult stopped and Pepi's monuments began to be quarried for their stone in the New Kingdom.
The question is, did it have something to do with the tsunami at the end of the 17th dynasty? Well, clearly it did, but to what extent?
Ultimately, Pepi's decisions to decentralize and regionalize the administration into nomes by marrying outside the family, giving power to outsiders over regional nomes, progressively weakened the king's primacy and ascendancy over his own administration.
It sounds like the sort of politics rampant in the lineage and the history of England with the War of the Roses. And just like good old England, where it was the church stirring the pot, which we will visit in a later episode, Pepi's actions displeased the priests of Ra, and ultimately resulted in the princedoms that marked the First Intermediate Period.
This territorial mode of organization survived for nearly 300 years after Pepi I's reign, before it disappeared at the dawn of the Middle Kingdom period. Pepi was succeeded by his son Merenra Nemtiumsaf I, with whom he may have shared power in a co-regency at the very end of his reign. The fourth king of the 6th dynasty, Merenra, was the son of Pepi I and Ankhesen Pepi I, and thus a grandson of the female vizier, Nebert, and her spouse Kui. While Merenra Nemtiumsaf was once believed to have served as a brief co-regent to his father, Pepi I Merenra, before ruling in his own right, the publication of the badly damaged South Saqqara stone annal document in 1995 preserves the record of Pepi I's final year and that it proceeds immediately to the first-year count of Merenra, showing that Merenra directly succeeded his father in power with no interregnum or co-regency. His nomen, theophorically referring to Nemti, was formerly read as Antiemsaf, a reading now known to be incorrect.
Which just goes to say that the history of ancient Egypt is not set in concrete, more so shifting sands.
Numerous 6th dynasty royal seals and stone blocks found at Saqqara indicate that Merenra's aunt, Queen Ankhesen Pepi II, was the wife of both Pepi I, Merenra's stepmother, and then Merenra's consort.
Which means that for some reason, Merenra's mother, Ankhesen Pepi I, must have died when he was young, of what we don't know. So given it must have been reasonably early in Pepi's reign, why was there no Queen's Pyramid built in Pepi's complex? Or was she the Egyptologists' mysterious Queen of the West?
Merenra supposedly had two children, Ankhesen Pepi III and Pepi II Neferkare.
Although it's possible Ankhesen Pepi III was the daughter of Pepi I and Ankhesen Pepi II, and thus Merenra's stepsister, half-sister and cousin, and yet, though Pepi II eventually married his sister/cousin, the Queen's Pyramid was located in the necropolis of Pepi I, rather than her king. Pepi II. More on that later.
Like his father, Merenra shared a fascination with Nubia and continued to explore deep into the region. He also began a process of royal consolidation, appointing Weni as the first governor of all of Upper Egypt and expanding the power of several other governors. The Pyramid of Merenra was constructed at the southern edge of the northern necropolis of Saqqara, 450 meters southwest of the Pyramid of Pepi I, and a similar distance to the Pyramid of Djedkare-Cc. First examined in the 1830s by John Pring, little is known about most of the complex, although there is a scant reference to the complex being surrounded by a mud brick perimeter wall,
which could have been added at a much later stage.
The son of Pepi I and half-brother to Pepi II, Merenra's pyramid was once called Merenra's Beauty Shines, or perhaps the perfection of Merenra appears, although now it is hard to get to, mostly in ruin, and barely noticeable next to other nearby monuments.
So what caused the damage? A tsunami? When?
Originally with a base of 78.75 meters, an inclination of 53 degrees 07 minutes 48, and a height of 52.5 meters, much of what we know of the pyramid comes from the biographies of Merenra's high officials, such as Uni, who provided valuable information on the origin of the materials used to build the pyramid. There was pink granite from Aswan, alabaster from Hatnop, and dark grey wak from Abhart, which was used to build the pyramidion and sarcophagus.
That's valuable, but it really only tells us what the structures were built of, not when they were built. And were the materials used to build the original structure, or used to build the extensions and make repairs?
In the 1880s, in search of pyramid texts, the subterranean chambers of Merenra's pyramid were explored by the French archaeologist Gaston Maspero, who, coincidentally, while the director of the Egyptian Antiquities Service, appointed a 25-year-old Howard Carter to the position of Inspector General of Monuments for Upper Egypt, and some years later introduced Carter to the 5th Earl of Carnarvon, those two subsequently becoming the discoverers of Tutankhamun's tomb.
Quite a coincidence.
Maspero also removed more than 65 feet of sand from the Sphinx in 1886, finding tombs below it.
Well, that's an interesting piece of information that seems to have been conveniently deeply buried. Tombs beneath the Sphinx. Were they tombs or just chambers? And why has that information been buried? More on that when we get to Giza later in the series.
The interior of Merenra's pyramid is consistent with that of many of the other pyramids at the location. The pyramid entered from the north face, leading via a descending corridor to a vestibule. It then continues along a second, level corridor until it reaches a barrier made up of 3 huge granite blocks.
There are those granite portcullises again. What was their real function?
Beyond the barriers, the corridor leads to an antechamber. To the left is a small serdab, to the right, the burial chamber.
The consistency of these subterranean chambers and their use of massive blocks of red granite further convinces me most of the Egyptologists are barking up the wrong tree, and that the whole history of ancient Egypt needs a complete rethink and overhaul.
In 1880, Maspero entered the burial chamber and discovered the ceiling had an astronomical theme of white stars on a black background, and the walls were inscribed with pyramid texts very similar to those in Pepi I's pyramid,
which surely were added during the reign of Merenre. But was the pyramid built during his reign? That's the big question.
The burial chamber also contained a niche for the canopic chest, sunk into the floor, and an intact black basalt sarcophagus decorated with coloured reliefs, including the royal palace facade motif that stood before the west wall. Even its lid, although pushed back, was mainly unbroken.
Basalt. Again, basalt. And when were the decorations done?
Maspero discovered the mummy of a child, its hair combed into a side curl, inside this sarcophagus, held by some to have been Merenra I, which would make it the oldest known royal mummy.
I think it's more likely, because of the mummy's wrappings, that it belonged to a much later intrusive 18th dynasty burial and was placed there after the tsunami, relocated from its original flooded tomb as part of the rebuilding and reconstruction after the tsunami at the end of the 17th dynasty. And that's probably how the pyramid was attributed to him. The same with all the other pyramids and their owners.
Only traces of the mortuary temple have been found, that evidence indicating that construction was halted abruptly at one point and never resumed, probably upon the pharaoh's death.
Or because it was destroyed by a tsunami.
Nothing is known of the Valley Temple, though there must have been one because there is reference to a causeway, about 250 meters long, that went around the pyramid of Djedkari ECC.
So much is still to be excavated and explored.
While Merenra was once presumed to have died at an early age, two recent archaeological discoveries suggest that Merenra's reign lasted slightly more than a decade. Since the South Saqqara stone shows Merenra's reign intervened between Pepi I and Pepi II and lasted for a minimum of slightly over a decade, this indirectly indicates that Merenra I was actually Pepi II's father, rather than Pepi I as was traditionally assumed. Merenra's daughter was Ankhesen Pepi III, the future wife of Pepi II.
Which would confirm that the mummy of the child is not that of Merenra.
The same South Saqqara stone, created during the reign of Merenra's son, Pepi II, credits Merenra with a minimum reign of 11 to 13 years.
So, what's true and what's romanticized speculation?
The decline of the Old Kingdom arguably began before the time of Pepi II, with nomarchs, regional representatives of the king, becoming more and more powerful and exerting greater influence, with increasing wealth and power appearing to have been handed over to high officials during Pepi II's reign, shifting power away from the central royal court to the regional nomarchs. The most notable member of the 6th dynasty was Pepi II Neferkare, meaning beautiful is the Kar of Re, succeeding the throne at the tender age of 6 after the death of Merenra I. Pepi II was traditionally thought to be the son of Pepi I and Queen Ankhesen Pepi II. However, the South Saqqara stone annals record that Merenra had a minimum reign of 11 years, and, when several 6th dynasty royal seals and stone blocks, the latter of which were found within the funerary temple of Queen Ankhesen Pepi II, the known mother of Pepi II, were discovered in the 1999 to 2000 excavation season at Saqqara, they demonstrated that, after Pepi I's death, Ankhesen Pepi then married Merenra and became his chief wife, raising the possibility that Pepi II could have been the son of Merenra. In Pepi I dying, and her marrying her nephew and stepson Merenra, Ankhesen Pepi changed her name from Ankhesen Pepi to Ankhesen Merenra, and an alabaster statue, now in the Brooklyn Museum, depicts Queen Ankhesen Merenra II with her young son, Pepi II, sitting on her lap, Pepi II in full kingly regalia, wearing the royal Nemes headdress and a kilt. This piece, one of only 3 known sculptural representations in existence of Pepi II. Shown as much smaller than his mother, the difference in size is atypical, because the king is usually shown larger than others and may refer to the early years of his reign, when Ankhesen Merenra II served as a regent, or co-regent, helped in turn by her brother, Jiao, who was a vizier under the previous pharaoh, or, alternatively, the statue may depict Ankhesen Merenra II as the Divine Mother. Another statue of Pepi II, now in the Egyptian Museum in Cairo, shows the king as a naked child, which may also reinforce the age he came to the throne. Inscriptions on the stone blocks found within the funerary temple of Queen Ankhesenpepi II at Saqqara give Ankhesenpepi II the royal titles of King's Wife of the Pyramid of Pepi I, King's Wife of the Pyramid of Merenre, King's Mother of the Pyramid of Pepi II. Therefore, today, many Egyptologists believe that Pepi II was more likely to be Merenre's own son, and therefore Pepi I's grandson, as Merenre is known to have married Pepi II's known mother, Queen Ankhesenpepi II. A glimpse of the personality of the pharaoh while he was still a child can be found in a letter he wrote to Harkov, the governor of Upper Egypt who led several expeditions under Merenre and Pepi II into Nubia. Sent to trade and collect ivory, ebony, and other precious items, in his last expedition, a trip to a place called Yam, Harkov captured a pygmy, and when news of this reached the royal court, an excited young king sent word back to Harkov that he would be greatly rewarded if the pygmy were brought back alive, where he would have likely served as an entertainer for the court. This letter was preserved as a lengthy inscription on Harkov's tomb. Pepi II had several wives, including Neith, who was possibly a daughter of Ankhesenpepi I and hence also Pepi II's cousin and half-sister. Neith was the mother of Pepi's successor Merenre Nemtiumsaf II. Next was Iput II, a half-sister of Pepi II, Ankhesenpepi III, the daughter of Merenre Nemtiumsaf I and hence a granddaughter of Pepi I, Ankhesenpepi IV, according to texts in her tomb the mother of King Neferkare, possibly King Neferkare of the First Intermediate Period, an Egyptian, also a daughter of Pepi I. Pepi II had two further sons, Nebkorhoidu and Tashepses, and possibly a daughter.
Half-sisters, half-brothers, half-cousins.
Pepi II is also mentioned in inscriptions found in the Phoenician city of Byblos and seems to have carried on foreign policy in ways similar to that of his predecessors, with copper and turquoise mined at Wadi Magara in the Sinai, and alabaster quarried from Hatnub. The Western Desert was known to have extensive caravan routes, some of these allowing for trade with the Kargar Oasis, the Salimer Oasis, and the Dappler Oasis, whilst in the south, the trade relations consisted of caravans trading with the Nubians, Egypt receiving goods such as incense, ebony, animal skins, and ivory. Pepi II's pyramid complex, called Neferkare, is established and living, located about 3 miles south of Dosar Step Pyramid, on the southern edge of the necropolis in South Saqqara, consists of Pepi's pyramid, named Pepi's Life is Enduring, the last of the Old Kingdom pyramids, along with its adjacent mortuary temple. His pyramid, following what had become their standard format, had a base of 78.5 meters, a slope of 53 degrees 13 minutes, and a height of 52.5 meters. However, despite Pepi II's exceptionally long reign, it was no larger than those of his predecessors. The core was originally constructed in 3 steps from small pieces of limestone set in clay mortar, with casing stones of fine white Jura limestone, now removed, with the core collapsed.
Removed? Collapsed? Or washed away by a massive tsunami? And were the 3 steps originally part of a ziggurat?
For some reason we don't understand, at some point during construction, after the casing was laid and the North Chapel built, the North Chapel was dismantled and the structure enlarged to 5 steps, with a girdle of mud bricks added to the height of the perimeter wall, about 6.5 meters wide, around the level of the 3rd step of core blocks.
Was this repair work done by Pepi II to a previously damaged structure?
The purpose of this band is not known, although it has been suggested that the builders wanted the structure to resemble the hieroglyph for pyramid, or that possibly the builders wanted to fortify the base of the structure due to an earthquake.
There is no way that mud brick would be strong enough to fortify the structure from earthquakes. So the answer seems obvious. And the key appears to be the north chapel and enclosure wall. They weren't so much dismantled as destroyed, along with the three-step structure, not by an earthquake, but by a tsunami. The next obvious conclusion is that if the rebuilding was then done by Pepi II, expanding the pyramid and rebuilding the chapel and wall, then the subsequent decimation of the site must have been due to a second catastrophe. Most likely the tsunami sometime around the end of the 17th dynasty. There's also the possibility, primarily because of the use of mud brick rather than alabaster or limestone, that part or all of the rebuilding could have been done during the New Kingdom, as although there's no clear evidence, the name of Khemweset, son of Ramses II, is on the casing stones of Shepseskaf's mastaba just to the southeast. And all of that raises the issue of when the first tsunami struck, which, going by the evidence, surely had to have been pre-dynastic. And that means the original three-step structure was most likely pre-dynastic as well.
Heading underground, the subterranean layout is basic. From the entrance chapel on the northern wall, a sloping passage leads to a vestibule in which was discovered alabaster and diorite vessel fragments, along with the golden blade of a small, rounded knife perhaps used in the ritual pyramid closing. Beyond the vestibule is a horizontal corridor, inscribed with pyramid texts, blocked by three huge portcullis slabs of granite.
There they are again, three huge granite portcullises. Why three? Surely, if tomb robbers are going to be able to get through one, then they're going to get past three.
From research and evidence, not one single mummy has been found inside a sarcophagus inside the burial chamber of a pyramid where the portcullises were intact and sealed.
So what if the portcullises weren't designed to keep tomb robbers out? They were designed to keep something in. What if the portcullises acted as some sort of safety valves or modifiers, and their operation had something to do with the resonance frequency of the subterranean chambers? That's a whole other line of investigation, one that can wait until we get to Saqqara later in the series, and we can investigate the subterranean chambers to see what they tell us.
Pepi II's mortuary temple, adjacent to the pyramid, is quite large and more traditional in its design, not unlike those of earlier 5th and 6th dynasty rulers.
Clearly, the visible ruins are the remains of structures rebuilt and claimed by Pepi II during the 6th dynasty. But the current devastation of the site is totally consistent with the effects of a tsunami sometime after the 6th dynasty.
Situated before the entrance corridor was a large, and to either side of it, two small, north-south oriented rooms. From here, a stairway led to a roof terrace on the temple. Also, the enlargement of the mortuary temple's eastern walls continued the development of the pylon-like features first begun at the mortuary temple of Nuzer at Abusir. To either side of the outer section of the mortuary complex are storage annexes. A red granite doorway led to an open porticoed court, paved in limestone, the walls appearing to have been undecorated, that originally contained 18 rectangular reddish quartzite pillars, which were decorated with scenes of the king in the presence of the gods, one of which, in the northwest corner, remains in situ and depicts the figure of Pepi II embracing Rehorikti, the remnants of the other pillars also featuring the king with the god.
How interesting! The red granite doorways have clearly been reused in the temple, supporting that there may well have been some pre-catastrophe temple here as well, probably anything up to 40 feet below the surface. But how can we be sure? The answer is the 18 rectangular reddish quartzite pillars.
Quartzite is a hard, non-foliated metamorphic rock, more durable than granite and withstands heat very well. It is almost entirely composed of silicon dioxide, SiO2, is free from pores, and has a smooth fracture. When struck, they break through, not around, the sand grains, producing a smooth surface instead of a rough and granular one.
This smooth fracture quality of quartzite clearly explains why Pepi employed rectangular quartzite columns in the temple instead of granite. It was easier to fashion and decorate with the relief of himself with the gods such as Ra-Harakati. And the usurping of the red granite doorways confirms for me that they were from a much earlier structure. But what of the other 17 rectangular reddish quartzite pillars? Bowled over or swept away by the tsunami at the end of the 17th dynasty, no doubt.
Directly behind, in the middle of the back wall of the transverse corridor between the inner and outer sections of the mortuary temple, is a scene showing the king spearing a hippopotamus, thus triumphing over chaos, a stylized model of a niche on the west wall, and, on the east wall, a scene of Pepi II said festival, and the festival of the god Min. A door on the north side of the corridor leads to the main pyramid courtyard, where there are 3 depressions, basins, probably meant to collect libation water.
I wonder if these are similar to those found in the Sun Temple of Nusra. We'll find out later in the series.
The entrance into the inner sanctum of the temple is decorated with a scene depicting Pepi II being suckled by goddesses.
I think it's fair to assume that this part of the temple was built by Pepi, but was the inner part.
The floor of the inner sanctum is about 1 meter higher than the outer part of the temple.
That is unusual.
In the inner sanctum of the temple is the cult chapel, its 5 niches framed in red granite and lined with pink granite.
Ah, there we have it. Even more red granite. That, combined with the elevated floor, tells me this structure predates the reign of Pepi. The question is, by how much? Could it be there is the remains of another ancient temple 40 to 50 feet below the surface here at South Saqqara? If only someone had the time to fully investigate here. But then again, maybe they have, and the whole thing's hush-hush.
Significantly, the center niche, which is slightly larger than the others, contains the base of a life-size royal statue, the only direct evidence we have that the chambers were in fact statue niches.
But not proof it was Pepi II.
Within the ruins of the complex, many statues of prisoners were found, reminiscent of the complexes of Teti, Djedkare, and Pepi I, though here many more were found.
So who was it?
Behind the chapel is the antechamber, its ceiling decorated with stars, that once had a single reddish quartzite pillar.
A quartzite pillar? No, I think that was a later addition by Pepi. And where is it now? Washed away?
The north door of the chapel led to 5 storage annexes, while the south door led to a small vestibule and square, single-pillared antechamber containing scenes of the king slaying enemies and hunting wild animals.
Of course, these decorations could have been much later additions.
Above the entrance to the offering hall that follows is a scene of the king embracing the goddess Nekbet.
Again, these were most likely added when the temple was rebuilt.
The offering hall had a vaulted ceiling and is decorated with a scene in which the king sits at an offering table with the symbol of raised arms, the symbol of the king's car, on his head. There was, of course, an altar, and at the back of this room adjacent to the pyramid, a false door.
Ignoring the decorations, which are most likely later additions during the rebuilding of the structure by Pepi, why would the hall have needed a vaulted ceiling? Clearly it's functional, and that function is relevant to the function of the pyramid. But what was that function?
A doorway at the south end of the dividing transverse corridor opened into a separate courtyard where the cult pyramid was located. With a base of 15.75 meters and a slope of 63 degrees, it has a small T-shaped passage leading to a small rectangular chamber, all of which was left rough.
But no mention of the nature of the stone.
The causeway connecting the mortuary temple to the valley temple was approximately 400 meters long, took 2 turns, and angled to the northeast, a small room at the upper turn that functioned as a guardhouse. Scenes within the remains of the causeway include a depiction of the king as a sphinx and as a griffin, massacring prisoners and enemies of Egypt, as well as scenes showing a funerary processions of servants bringing offerings from the mortuary estates and various divinities approaching the ruler on his throne. The Valley Temple, once on the shores of a lake, long since gone, was very different to the usual plan of some earlier kings. Fronted by a wide, angular rectangular terrace that was open on its east side and oriented northwest-southeast along a now non-existent canal, there were harbour ramps and entrances at either end of the wide temple, and an entrance in the middle in line with the causeway.
Its current location giving an indication that the level of the Nile during the 6th Dynasty was much higher than it is now, which is consistent with the evidence we discovered in the previous episodes.
In the centre of the wall of the terrace was a single red granite doorway, inscribed with Pepi's names and titles.
Again, my gut tells me that this red granite doorway is from a much earlier previous pre-dynastic temple, and that the inscriptions are probably crude and added when the granite was reused to create the river entrance to Pepi II's complex.
Within the Valley Temple, the front hall, supported by 8 pillars, fragments of the decorative theme have survived, showing the king being received by gods, and a scene of hippopotamus being hunted, discovered in the vestibule behind the pillared hall, which also contained a stairway leading to the Valley Temple's roof terrace, and the entrances into the side storage annex and the entrance to the ascending causeway. To the north, northwest, and to the south of Pepi II's complex are the pyramids and mortuary temples of at least 3 of Pepi II's queens, those belonging to Neith, the daughter of Pepi I, Iput II, the daughter of his brother Merenre, and another wife, named Wedjebten.
So Pepi's satellite pyramid is not a queen's pyramid at all. But then he built 3 further adjacent pyramids for 3 of his 5 consorts. I think we can dispel that they were built as pyramids for his queens.
With a base of 23.5 meters, the Pyramid of Neith, to the north, is the largest of the Queen's pyramids and may have been the first to be built. It had a 3-step core built of local limestone, with a fine white limestone for the casing. The entrance was through the pavement of the pyramid's open courtyard, located in a chapel in the middle of the pyramid's north side, fronted by 2 obelisks, and containing, on the south wall of the chapel, a red granite false door that sealed the entrance corridor.
Why would you use a false door of granite when the rest of the pyramid was made of limestone? You wouldn't, unless the granite was recycled, like it had been at so many of the other temples back up the Nile.
The entrance corridor descended to a pink granite barrier placed at the point where it leveled out, a second barrier in place just prior to arriving at the burial chamber.
Just as expected, more red granite.
Oriented east-west, the burial chamber is located on the pyramid's vertical axis. It has a flat ceiling, with decorations of stars on a dark background, and pyramid texts decorate 3 of its walls, the 4th, west of the sarcophagus, having a symbolic palace facade. Neith's empty red granite sarcophagus remains in the chamber, along with her canopic chest of the same material.
I wonder if the red granite sarcophagus and the canopic chest were cut out of one of the monolithic chambers found in one of the other subterranean structures.
Ne's pyramid has its own satellite pyramid.
And who was this for? No, scratch the Queen's pyramid theory, it does not compute. But we should check the other pyramids just to be sure.
The next pyramid, to the west, didn't differ that much from that of Neith, and was ascribed to Iput II, thought to be a daughter of Merenre and one of Pepi II's less attested queens. Although now badly damaged, it was smaller, with poorer finishings. Once again, there was an adjacent chapel with 2 obelisks, and a red granite false door, and a mortuary temple.
Bingo! The consistent evidence tells us a totally different history.
The subterranean chambers are also decorated with pyramid texts.
And no doubt contain granite structures.
A granite sarcophagus, supposedly ascribed to Anchises Pepi IV, another consort of Pepi II, was discovered in the westernmost storeroom of the mortuary temple.
Strange place for a sarcophagus in the storeroom of a mortuary temple. Had it been salvaged from the previous ruins? Clearly there were only 3 pyramids to usurp, and poor Anchises Pepi IV, being 4th in the pecking order, missed out.
Inscriptions found on both sides of the basalt sarcophagus lid contain part of the royal annals of the 6th Dynasty.
A granite sarcophagus and a basalt lid? That doesn't fit. What does fit is that they were both usurped and the lid was decorated sometime in the 6th Dynasty.
The pyramid of Iput II also has its own satellite pyramid.
And who was that for? The Queen's pyramid theory seems dead in the water.
The third Queen's pyramid, southeast of Pepi's pyramid, belonged to Wedjebten, believed to have been a daughter of Pepi I and wife of Pepi II. Both the pyramid and the chapel and mortuary temple are completely ruined, the only openly visible evidence of their existence being an alabaster offering table bearing an inscription of the Queen's name. Apart from the absence of a serdab adjoining the antechamber, the substructure of the pyramid doesn't differ much from that of the pyramids of the other queens. The walls of the burial chamber, and possibly the corridors, again covered in fragments of the pyramid text.
They don't know, they're guessing.
Part of an inscription found in the mortuary temple claims that the pyramidion was sheathed in gold.
And if that's true, it would certainly raise interest in a reinvestigation of the site.
Wedjebten's pyramid also has a cult pyramid, about 15.75 meters square, with a T-shaped passage and a small chamber, all of which was left rough.
Rough or damaged? And are there red granite portcullises beneath the surface? I'd lay money on it.
Pepi's other consorts, Queen Anchises Pepi III, was buried in a pyramid near the pyramid of Pepi I, Merenre, and Anchises Pepi IV was buried in a chapel in the complex of Queen Wedjebten.
And what else is curious is 5 wives, but only 3 pyramids. Sound familiar? Okay, if all the Queen's pyramids weren't tombs, and the main pyramids weren't tombs, what were they? And why would you need so many of them so close together? Something we shall consider once we've looked at all the evidence.
Later in his reign, it is known that Pepi II divided the role of vizier so that there were 2 viziers, one for Lower Egypt, which moved several times, and the southern vizier for Upper Egypt, based at Thebes, a further decentralization of power away from the royal capital of Memphis. Due to Manetho's Egyptiaker, Pepi II is often mentioned as the longest reigning monarch in history, with a reign of 94 years. But the ancient sources upon which Manetho's estimate is based are long lost, and could have resulted from a misreading on Manetho's behalf. The Turin Canon attributes 90+ years of reign to Pepi II, but this document dates to the time of Ramses II, 1,000 years later, and its accuracy for the reign length of the Old Kingdom king, Pepi II, is uncertain. At the present time, the oldest written source contemporary with Pepi II, based on the complete absence of higher attested dates for Pepi beyond his year after the 31st count, year 62 on a biannual cattle count, implies that he had a reign of at least 62 complete or partial years. Therefore, some Egyptologists suggest instead that Pepi II died shortly after a reign of about 64 years.
That's probably closer to the mark, but how do we know for sure? It's a 30-year difference, and it goes to show that we can't be 100% confident that everything the Egyptologists tell us is true. Most of it appears to be speculation.
Pepi II's reign marked a sharp decline of the Old Kingdom. As the power of the nomarchs grew, the power of the pharaoh declined, and, with no dominant central power, local nobles began raiding each other's territories. There are few official contemporary records or inscriptions of Pepi II's immediate successors, but, according to Manetho and the Turin King list, after his extremely long reign, believed to have been between 64 and 94 years long, Pepi II was succeeded by his son, Merenre-Nemtiemsaf II. The sixth and penultimate ruler of the 6th Dynasty, Merenre-Nemtiemsaf II, whose mother was Neith-A, likely ascended the throne as an old man, succeeding his long-lived father, Pepi II Neferkare, at a time when the power of the pharaoh was crumbling. Merenre-Nemtiemsaf II is attested on the fourth line, column 6 of the Turin Canon, a king list redacted in the early Ramesside period, and on the 39th entry of the Abydos king list, which dates to the reign of Seti I, the only document where Merenre-Nemtiemsaf II bears the throne name Merenre. Manetho's Egyptiaker also records the existence of Merenre-Nemtiemsaf II, giving Merenre-Nemtiemsaf II's name as Menthesouphis. His consort and sister was most likely Nitocris. Nothing is known for certain of Merenre-Nemtiemsaf II's activities, but it is highly likely that, during his brief reign, he had to deal with the rise of the provincial nomarchs and the collapse of the royal power. There is only one contemporary artifact known for sure to belong to Merenre-Nemtiemsaf II, a damaged false door inscribed with Sanesu Semsu Nemtiemsaf, meaning the elder king's son Nemtiemsaf, discovered near the site of the Pyramid of Neith, Pepi II's half-sister and queen, and most likely Merenre-Nemtiemsaf II's mother.
And what caused the damage? Was it before Nemtiemsaf II even usurped it? Or was the damage caused by a tsunami at the end of the 17th dynasty?
A second artifact may possibly belong to Merenre-Nemtiemsaf II, a decree to protect the funerary cults of Queens Anchises and Pepi I and Neith, discovered in the mortuary temple of Queen Neith. Manetho credits Menthesouphis with a reign of 1 year, and in the Turin Canon it is still readable as 1 year and 1 month, following the reign of Pepi II Neferkare. So it's possible Merenre-Nemtiemsaf II started a pyramid for himself, and, if so, it would likely have been in Saqqara, close to that of his father.
Or there is, was, and never has been a pyramid started or built by Nemtiemsaf II.
Merenre-Nemtiemsaf II reigned for just over a year before he was succeeded by the obscure pharaoh, Net-Jerka-Re-Sipter, also known as Nitocris-Sipter, the prenomen Net-Jerka-Re, inscribed on the 40th entry of the Abydos king list, a king list redacted during the reign of Seti I, immediately following Merenre-Nemtiemsaf II on the list. In addition, the nomen Nitocris-Sipter is inscribed on the 5th column, 7th row, of the Turin Canon, another king list redacted during the early Ramesside period, in the equivalent spot of the prenomen Net-Jerka-Re, immediately after that of Merenre-Nemtiemsaf II, with the fragment where this name appears belonging to the end of the 6th dynasty. Additionally, the nomen Sipter, being masculine, indicates that Nishikati was in fact a male pharaoh.
But was he?
According to popular tradition, as recorded by Manetho 2 millennia later, Merenre-Nemtiemsaf II was succeeded by Queen Nishikris, or Nishikret, the first female ruler of Egypt.
I doubt she was the first, as we've had numerous previous contenders. Neithhotep, Mer-Neith, Unkassenpepi II.
It was long claimed that the name Nishikreti, which is Nishikris in Greek, appears on a fragment of the Turin king list as the nomen Nishikati Sipter, and that the name Nishikreti is in fact a faulty transcription of the prenomen of a clearly male king, Net Jerkare Sipter, who is the same king named on the Abydos king list as the successor of the 6th Dynasty king, Merenre-Nemtiemsaf II. So the name Nishikris, which is not mentioned in any native contemporary Egyptian inscriptions, such as the various kings' lists, probably originates from the prenomen Neshikirti, which itself either comes from a corruption of Net Jerkare, or else Neshikirti Sipter was the nomen of the king and Net Jerkare his prenomen, and there is considerable doubt that the queen, Nishikris, ever existed.
So where does the claim Nitocris was a queen come from?
In his text, Histories 2-100, the Greek historian Herodotus, writing in the 5th century BC, records a legend in which an Egyptian queen, Nishikris, took revenge on a rioting mob responsible for the murder of her brother and husband, allegedly Merenre-Nemtiemsaf II.
Nitocris succeeded her brother. He had been the king of Egypt, and he had been put to death by his subjects, who then placed her upon the throne. Determined to avenge his death, she devised a cunning scheme by which she killed hundreds of Egyptians. She constructed a spacious underground chamber and, on pretense of inaugurating it, threw a banquet, inviting all those whom she knew to have been responsible for the murder of her brother. Suddenly, when the banquet was underway, as they were feasting, she led the riverine upon them by means of a large, secret duct. After this fearful revenge, she flung herself into a room filled with embers, so as to escape her punishment.
The story is also reported by Manetho in Egyptiacar, nearly 200 years later, writing of Nishikris, that she was
braver than all the men of her time, the most beautiful of all women.
But was Manetho quoting original sources, or was he just quoting Herodotus?
Manetho goes further and credits Nishikris with the construction of the Pyramid of Menkaure.
Which goes to show that Manetho can't be relied on as a reliable source for anything. But it not only raises the question as to whether Merenre-Nemtiemsaf II was actually assassinated, but by whom and why. No harem conspiracy this time, so was it the rival viziers of the adjacent nomes? Or did the priests of Ra have their hands in it again? So, Merenre assassinated, why did they put Nitocris on the throne? Perhaps it was temporary, until they could install their chosen ruler. But all of that was thwarted when she wreaked her revenge.
If Nishikris was in fact a historical person, then she may have been the sister of Merenre-Nemtiemsaf II and the daughter of Pepi II, Queen Neith, and acted as the interregnum queen, Net Jerkare Sipter, who enjoyed a short reign at a time when the power of the pharaoh was crumbling and that of the local nomarchs was on the rise.
Surely it's possible that when Merenre-Nemtiemsaf II died, his wife and sister, Nitocris, ruled in his place, changing her name to Nitiquerte Sipta, Netjekare Sipta, though whether she enjoyed her short reign when her husband was assassinated and the power of the pharaoh was crumbling around her is highly unlikely.
The regime of the Old Kingdom was rapidly disintegrating amidst the rise in power of the provincial nomarchs, which had become hereditary, and as these nomarchs grew increasingly powerful and influential, they erected tombs in their own domains and often raised armies. The rise of these numerous nomarchs inevitably created conflicts between neighboring provinces, often resulting in intense rivalries and warfare between them.
The assassination of Merenre-Nemtiem-Saf II may even have been the event that brought about the end of the Old Kingdom and the beginning of what has been labelled the First Intermediate Period. In this episode, we were going to examine and review the 6th Dynasty and wrap up our examination of the Old Kingdom pyramids, supposedly built by its pharaohs. However, what we discovered was, firstly, the 6th Dynasty, while marked by several long, seemingly successful reigns, was also marked by increased political instability due to the rapidly disintegrating power of the throne, supposedly caused by the rise in power of the provincial nomarchs, who grew increasingly powerful and influential throughout the dynasty, and who excavated what appears to be offices in Aswan, not tombs, as is claimed, and raised their own armies, which inevitably created conflicts between neighbouring provinces, often resulting in intense rivalries and possibly warfare between them. The evidence further told us that much of this unrest and conspiracy appeared to originate from within the pharaoh's own harem, and perhaps from the priests of Ra. Second, our examination of the 6th Dynasty pyramids of its pharaohs showed there is strong consistent evidence both of external damage and repair, and of subterranean red granite, that the Old Kingdom pyramids may not actually have been built when Egyptologists suggest they were, that they weren't built as burial places for kings and queens, and that the positions of the pyramids may in fact have some direct relevance to maps of the stars when Egypt was in the southern hemisphere. Further, the evidence surrounding the Queen's pyramids was inconsistent and couldn't be relied on, that the structures were already present and usurped or allocated to the king's consorts, even his daughters, on an ad hoc basis once the king had claimed a pyramid. Thirdly, we discovered that the mortuary temples were more than likely repaired structures, usurped and augmented by the pharaohs who had claimed ownership of the pyramids. Further, that there were at least 2 tsunamis that had swept across Egypt and severely damaged the structures, one at the end of the 17th dynasty, the other pre-dynastic. So were these 6th dynasty temples and pyramids exhumed following a previous tsunami, only to be damaged by a subsequent tsunami at the end of the 17th dynasty. Evidence from our examinations on Elephantine Island in episodes 7 and 8 would seem to indicate there may have been some event between the 6th dynasty and the intermediate period, possibly even triggering the intermediate period. In the end, we got some answers to some of our questions, but we've got lots more questions and we've got lots more evidence to examine. We've still got several pyramids attributed to the Middle Kingdom before we can confidently evaluate the evidence concerning them. But first, join me in the next episode where I examine in detail the ruins on and around Elephantine Island.